Let's try to understand now. Again, while the context is already discussed, let's try to spend some more time talking about the capability part. Okay, we say that a business does not have to include all the inputs or processes, right, that the seller use, in operating that particular business, right? Now, the term market participant reflects from Ind AS 113, the fair value measurements that we have already dealt with. So it says that if that acquirer or the market participant is capable of utilizing the acquired set of activities and assets to produce outputs by integrating the acquired set with its own inputs and processes, the acquired set might constitute a business, might still constitute a business, right? If the elements that are missing from an acquired set are not present with the market participant, but are, readily available or replaceable or replicable, that again, it might result into a acquisition of a business. But then the thumb rule is you expect both inputs and processes. If not all of these, at least some inputs or processes have to be present to refer, it as a business combination, right? Let's try to understand this with the help of a small scenario. Okay, let's say there's a company X which is into hospitality business. Okay, so it has another company. There's a company Y, which is again operating a hotel, right? So company X acquires, let's say, stake in company Y, right? Now, what this company Y is all about, it has a property, a hotel property, of course, right? Where it has its own, booking or reservation system, right? It has, of course, all the facilities, maybe, a pool or a gym membership facility or, other amenities, for example, available, right? So essentially, when you look at company Y, right, through this hotel, which is, of course, an input, right? And then all the processes in place, it is also able to generate revenue. So all these aspects of input, process, and revenue, output for that matter, they're all applicable or available. But then what company X does, it acquires that setup of company Y and discontinues, right, with the use of reservation system of company Y, for the simple reason that the company X, the acquirer, integrates the entire booking with its own networking, with its own booking system, for example, right? Which suggests that while those inputs, processes, and even to the extent here output exists, you don't have to necessarily pick up all the processes just like that, right? You may have a reason to not acquire it because you don't need that. You're simply interested in the business in terms of the functioning. There's a value that you see, but you don't have to necessarily, use everything that the other businesses, let's say, utilizing, right? I mean, you would come across a lot of scenarios wherein there could be, let's say, an acquirer, let's say a company A, which acquires company B, a running business, right? And it simply discontinues doing that, right? The whatever company B is doing, it stops. Company A acquires company B and simply stops that entire set of operations. It does not make a difference. Even then, we are saying it's a business combination. Whether the acquirer is interested in using those facilities or the processes or the operations, etc., is involved, it is not exactly a relevant question here. Okay, what is important in place is that there has to be at least some inputs and processes for that other entity to be referred to as a business, and accordingly the accounting under business combination would apply. Okay, right? Now this could be an important point, and we need to again address it at any point in time from availability of the input and process is concerned. It says that in case there is an entity which is under a development stage, it could be very common in case of a startup culture. It could be very common for IT companies. It could be more often seen for pharmaceutical business, right. So the question is that is the transferred set of activities and assets a business, right? You need to consider a lot more aspects, whether those planned principal activities have begun, are there people, are there the patents or the copyrights or intellectual property, etc., which are available as far as those existing set of inputs are concerned. Is there any plan to execute so that you can actually start generating revenue, even if it's not there, of course, because we are purely referring to the development phase under input and process? Or would you have an access, or would you be able to, let's say, have an access to the market wherein you can actually create and sell these products that you are trying to build, right? You look at all these aspects on the basis of integrated set of those activities. It's all about, do you see a capability being built while under the development stage that you would have an access to the market sooner than later, right? That's something which is the expectation. And while it may appear theoretical in some context, when you look at some examples, we should be able to, let's say, understand the context better. So let's have a look at this scenario. It says that Workhard Limited is under a development stage, and its workforce mainly consists of research engineers. Also, the revenue generating operations are yet to commence. The research engineers are working on developing a new technology that has a pending patent application. Talks of negotiation of licensing to a number of customers has reached, okay, an advanced stage. Now it requires additional funding to complete the development work and commence those production. The value of the intangible net assets is 150 crores. Smart Work comes and agrees to pay 130 crores for 65%. Now this is referred to as a controlling interest. We have not discussed the term controlling interest, but we can safely say it would be Smart Work Limited is willing to acquire the business and have a 65% shareholding in that particular business, right? A majority shareholding, and probably it would be able to, of course, have exercise its power or a control over the business of Workhard Limited. The question is, you are required to determine whether the above constitutes a business combination or not. Okay. Now, importantly, we are talking about inputs and processes there, right? Essentially, the output is not present because the revenue generating operations are have not yet started, right? Now, when you look at this scenario, the inputs would include your research engineers, right? There is a technology, right? So these are all essential inputs which are there, of course. And then we look at, of course, the processes, where you look at, of course, the development of the technology further. And there are, of course, discussions as well going on where you are seeing the potential, that is the capability, right? The potential or the capability to be able to generate that output, or to be able to generate that or create that output, right? So they're looking at, of course, all these aspects of commercial production and stuff like that. Okay. When you look at this scenario, okay, essentially these two aspects of inputs and the process, they are both available very, very candidly. Okay. That simply means that this is an example of a business clearly. All right. It simply means it's an example of a business. So we can simply say that yes, Smart Work Limited is undertaking a business combination in this particular case by acquiring 65% shares in Work Hard Limited. Okay. Although we don't want to spend a lot of time talking about the accounting in detail, that is something which is due later, at a subsequent point in time. But effectively, what we are saying is that there's a purchase consideration, right, wherein it's provided that 130 crores will be paid for 65% stake. Okay. And then we are saying fair value of the business that is given at, of course, 150 crores. But then this represents 100% of the business. Okay. The worth of the business is 150 crores for the 100% shares. You are acquiring 65% stake at 130 crores. What is the premium that you are paying, right? What is the premium that you are paying for that 65%? Okay. So we may argue that if I were able to determine the fair value of 65%, I can simply calculate the difference between what is being offered or what is being paid versus what is the value thereof. Okay. And that premium, if it is a positive one, that would result into a goodwill. Okay. Effectively, I can say, although, as I said, that the accounting is something that we really want to talk in detail with the help of a lot of questions, and we gradually come to that, part, right? I can say that a 150 crores is 100%, then 65% would simply be, that is 15 into 690, and that's 97.5. So you may say that the goodwill calculation in this case is 32.5 crores. Okay. You don't want to really go farther than this, but what you want to remember here is you ask the question, is there an acquirer? Or rather, let's say the first question is there a business being acquired, or is there a business combination? The answer is yes, right? The question is, who is the acquirer? We are provided that the acquirer company is Smart Work Limited. Okay. Right? What are they acquiring? They're acquiring the business worth 150 crores. What are they paying? Payment of 130 crores for 65% stake. Right? And for that, there is a goodwill, which is 32.5 crores, which is calculated here. Okay. So that's how you start building that, a stepwise flow in terms of how do you look at whether there's a business combination. If yes, then who's the acquirer? What is it? So the date is not mentioned, so we don't have to worry about that part. So, the acquisition date is not required, but what is being acquired are, of course, those fair value of that assets or the liabilities pertaining to this particular business of Work Hard Limited. And that's how, for example, the accounting flows into the picture, right? Let's have a look at the formal solution. Of course, we are given that although Work Hard Limited is not yet earning revenues, there are a number of indicators to justify that there are sufficient integrated set of activities and assets that are capable of being managed to produce a return for the investors. For example, there are specialist engineers available. There's a viable plan to complete the development work. It has an access to those customers who are willing to buy the output, and Importantly, you're paying a premium, which we calculated, for example, 32.5 crores for a 65% interest. Now, in case, and normally we expect, and that's something which is a business combination is observed in scenarios. In case you're paying a premium, it is generally observed that a payment of a premium is likely an indication that a business exists, and that is how you start taking this into consideration. Okay, let's have a look at yet another scenario. This could be a typical one to follow. Let's see. It says that Sagar Limited, a subsidiary of a property investment group whose 100% equity and voting rights were acquired by Moti Limited. Okay. Sagar Limited owns 4 investment properties. The properties are single tenant commercial warehouses subject to long-term leases. The leases oblige Sagar Limited to provide security services and basic maintenance, which Sagar has outsourced to third-party contractors. The administration of Sagar Limited's lease was carried out by an employee of its former parent company on a part-time basis, but this individual does not transfer to the new owner. The question is, you're required to assess whether this constitutes a business combination. Now, essentially and importantly in this case, you want to understand that you're talking about Sagar Limited, of course, and there are investment properties in place. Okay, and they are, of course, rented out as well. Okay, but when you look at, so effectively we are talking about, of course, both input and clearly visible output. And then we can say that there are security services and basic maintenance available. So even the processes are available, right? In a very simplistic, in a very bird's eye view, it appears that, yeah, it clearly meets the definition of a business. But then if you take a step back and try to understand how critical are these processes as far as the running of the business is concerned, right? The criticality and the severity of these processes are could be an important parameter for us to discuss before we can conclude whether we are looking at an acquisition of a business or it could be an acquisition of an asset only. Okay, so it's provided that these buildings or these properties are warehouses which are already let out for a single tenant, right? Or to a single tenant, for example, right? And at the same time, you're talking about that, yes, there are some basic maintenance or security services. And even if there were some basic or bare minimum requirements of such security services or maintenance, even these are outsourced to third party, right? Effectively, the idea is that as far as the Sagar Limited's operations are concerned or the processes are concerned, they are not material from the execution perspective, right? They're not a key aspect of, let's say, how Sagar Limited is, for example, running its operations. Okay, so effectively, when you look at this entire scenario, right, even though both input and process, so output we can still ignore for any such conversations, even though both input and processes are available, these processes are not exactly a set of integrated activities there, right? So one way to understand is that if you look at this stake of Moti Limited, very likely, right? Very likely in this case, Moti Limited is pretty much interested in those properties themselves, right? Wherein the process does not have a role to play, right? So that the absence of that integrated set would makes us believe that as far as the business of Sagar Limited is concerned, as far as the individuality of Sagar Limited is concerned, it is only confined to those availability of those properties or the assets rather than the processes along with those assets, right? So in that context, what we want to conclude here is that something as far as an investment property business is concerned, those tenancy arrangements or revenue generation activities relating to that are not exactly the key process from meeting the definition of a business, and as such any such acquisition of investment properties would generally be considered as a part of an acquisition of an asset and not an acquisition of a business. Okay. And that is where we start looking at very specifically investment properties would, for example, let's say, meet the basic attribute of the definition of an asset. I mean, in one way, we may even say that, think about one company which has some investments in a deposit. Okay. Now, in a way, we can say that the company is earning money, but if I'm purely looking at the value of the business, it is to do with the value of the deposit. So I'm interested in the deposit, and which is not a business but an asset. So in the same context, we are talking about the investment properties wherein the return is essentially the attribute of the asset itself rather than of a business, right? So we may want to conclude that even though there may be an existence of these two, we might as well conclude that it is not an acquisition of a business, but an acquisition of an asset. All right. Okay. Let's have a look at another example that should provide us a more clearer picture with respect to whether, in case of investment properties, can we still say that there is an acquisition of a business, for example. It says that Mega Limited, a subsidiary of a property investment group, whose 100% equity and voting rights are, acquired by Star Limited. Mega Limited owns 4 investment properties, and these are multi-tenant residential condominiums, which are subject to short-term rental arrangements. Now, versus the previous case wherein we talked about a single tenant, long-term lease arrangements where the collections and recoveries are insignificant as a part of the process. Here you're talking about multi-tenant condominiums where you start looking at, of course, collections as a critical part, right? Also, it says that Mega is obliged to provide security services and substantial maintenance, which Mega has outsourced to specialist contractors, right? So even the maintenance part is a key element of the processes. All right. Now it also provides further. It says that Mega Limited has 8 employees who deal directly with the tenants and with the outsourced contractors to resolve any non-routine security or maintenance requirements. These employees are involved in a variety of lease management tasks. For example, identification and selection of tenants, lease negotiations and rent reviews, and even marketing activities to maximize the quality of tenants and the rental income. Okay. The question is, you're required to assess whether the above constitutes a business combination or not. Very, very clearly. Of course, the properties suggest presence of inputs. But now when you look at the process, you start looking at everything, where you look at, of course, the maintenance part of it. That's eventually the responsibility of, the company Mega Limited. You're talking about, of course, lease management tasks. And here you would need to understand that the objective of these lease management tasks and marketing activities is to ensure that the returns are increasing. the quality of the tenancy or the tenants is maximized, right? So the objective is not just to manage a set of operations, but it is rather to execute it in a manner that your returns are maximized. So the objective is rather strategic rather than administrative. Okay, and when you start building that part, the process and inputs, they are aligned as an integrated set of activities, right? So they're aligned as integrated set of activities, which simply means that this would be a clearly an example of a business combination, right? When you compare the information and the facts given in this scenario versus the previous scenario of Sagar Limited, you observe that in a normal tenancy arrangement, it's a merely straightforward process of collecting money. But here, it goes beyond the collections. It's all about the selecting the right tenant, the negotiations, rent reviews, marketing activities, etc. They would all be coming in together. And in this case, an acquisition by Star Limited of Mega Limited would mean it's an acquisition of a business or a business combination. All right. And that's something which is explained in the solution. It says that in the above scenario, Mega Limited consists of a group of revenue generating assets together with employees and activities. They are not just doing an administrative or an ancillary work, right? It is rather an integrated effort to be actually called as a business than just called as managing the assets there. Okay, right. Now, if we get a sense of that, we should be in a very comfortable position, for example, to solve these cases. It says that Smart Limited is a technology company. Since its beginning, the company has been conducting in-house research and development activities through its skilled resources, and recently obtained an IP right, intellectual property right, in form of patents over certain technology. Recently, Smart Limited has obtained regulatory approvals to commence production in its manufacturing plant from the patented technology. However, it has not earned any revenue so far and does not have any customer contracts either. Now, Smart Limited is acquired by Bright Limited. The question is whether this constitutes a business, right? That's what the question is. Now, importantly, when you look at this entire scenario, you again go back to the basic question of input and process, right? We're talking about, of course, the technology being developed. You're talking about the skilled resources as a presence of inputs there, okay? And then you're talking about, of course, regulatory approvals coming in picture. You're talking about, of course, IP rights being obtained. You're talking about research and development activities, right? So they are both again integrated. So despite the fact that the output is not present because no revenue has been earned so far, you would still want to classify this as a part of the definition of a business. Okay, it says that the definition of business requires existence of inputs and processes, the skilled resources, manufacturing plant, and IPR, along with the other processes would constitute inputs, and the processes in lines as far as Ind AS 103 is concerned. Now, these are an integrated set, of course, and accordingly, it would be able to obviously conclude it to be, having the ability to produce output. Okay, it does not matter whether you are generating revenue in today's time is not relevant here. The capability is more important. Okay, so in a way, if there is an acquisition by the other company, it would necessarily mean that there is a business combination in place. All right. Now it says, by the way, further, it says that keeping the same facts as above, but you also have revenue contracts in the sales force, and Bright Limited acquires all the inputs and processes other than the sales force. Then how do you deal with that? Again, it's not at all different from what we already concluded. When you are saying that it's a business combination, when there's an acquisition of a business, it does not mean that it has to be the entire business which is being acquired. Okay. It does not mean that it has to be the entire business which is acquired. So what do? We say that even if a portion of the businesses or the inputs or processes are acquired, that will still constitute a business, because very likely Bright Limited might be in a position of, position to, let's say, apply its own sales force. So that ability to replace, let's say, and replicate those processes or inputs is definitely available with the acquirer. So from those perspective, the replication or obtaining by the market participant to be able to generate the output, of course, the acquirer would want to call it an acquisition of a business itself. Okay, so it would remain the same as far as the definition under Ind AS 103 is concerned. Okay. Now we want to obviously just quickly recap on what all we have done. What we scope in here is importantly all the business combinations, and there is a concept of common control. We're discussing that separately. However, any asset acquisition specifically, and also joint ventures when you are collaborating, so that is not a part of Ind AS 103. Business combinations would talk about input and processes importantly. Output may not be necessarily required, right? There is also a concept of control. We're not discussing that as yet. This is something that we want to deal with under Ind AS 110. Okay. Of course, the relevant term is capability, right? The business again does not have to include all the inputs or processes, but there has to be at least some inputs or processes to have that ability or capability to be able to create that revenue generating capacity in future also. All right. Thank you very much.